I've been invited today to talk about art, and I'm here in Georgia, and it's a great pleasure for me to talk about also Georgian art, because due to the history of Georgia, it is very difficult to understand how Georgian art has been able to be successful, because in the former Soviet Union, Georgia was very successful in the art scene, and therefore we have a lot of very famous Georgian artists from that period. But the more modern period is still in the process of developing. And I think, however, it is very promising, and I understand that there is a certain internationalization going on in the market. And my style of collecting was a very personal style of collecting, and it was not related to a systemic or systematic way of collecting. In fact, I was just simply typically friends with the artists, and then occasionally I bought some works of them. So that's how I ended up, after 40 years of collecting, with quite an interesting collection. And also among them, there are also the Georgians, or a big number of Georgians. And I understand also that if you want to become a collector, my recommendation would be to be systematic and not to take this very individual form of collecting, but to rather go into the market, take the advice from galleries and professional people who follow the markets and understand what they recommend to you. And that's the better way of collecting, when the aim is to collect for purposes of investment or wealth investment or something. So I have not paid attention to that particular factor, but I do understand, of course, that it is a very developed market internationally, and so Georgia has also its place, and people have in fact started to get away from the Soviet type of art and dig into the modern art of the Georgians. And I would definitely advise to go and visit the museums, visit the galleries, and discuss with the gallerists what is a good way of collecting. But of course, ultimately, it's your own interest in buying things, having things around you that please you, that you like. So I've been coming to Georgia since 1997. So that was a period where there was almost no presence in the art market. And however, there were a lot of artists, and they were trying to find investors or collectors and so forth. Now I am a member of the Art Club Tbilisi in 2025, which gives the understanding how long I have been exposed to Georgia and the Georgian market, and also following the Georgian developments. And I'm very pleased to see what I see. I would say something in the sense that galleries in our countries are also always a social place. When an exhibition opens, then people go there and meet there and talk and find new friends and other art collectors and exchange opinions. I would think that, and I have been visiting exhibition openings here in Tbilisi, and I was quite impressed by the people that were coming and visiting those exhibitions and appreciating the quality, the new quality of the art itself also. It's important to understand that art is also an element of society building, and I think Georgia still needs this kind of society building. And I think, for example, being a member of an art club is something quite normal in our countries. And so this is a new situation that I've also come across. For me, it's very nice to understand this and come and hopefully be able to visit the openings as many times as possible. I'm not always in Georgia, so therefore I cannot be in every opening, but it's quite important to understand the quality of the work or of the galleries and the museums to develop the society. For example, in Frankfurt, where I come from, I'm a member of the Städel Club of also interested collectors, and therefore I know this kind of meetings and how important it is and how much the people love it to be a member of such groups, societies, or whatever you want to call it. I think so that you will be in good hands if you go and be a member of the Art Club Tbilisi and visit the galleries that are associated with the Art Club. I think it is important also that you establish international contacts from club to club. We have tried to do this in completely different contexts already here in Georgia, and I have understood that it was a very uphill struggle to collect members because people in Georgia didn't want to pay membership fees and didn't understand why it is needed, so to speak. But it is quite natural to be a friend of a museum or a member of any type of art club, for example, for modern art, because the Museum of Modern Art here is still too small and doesn't really attract enough attention so that you can build on that for a membership in the modern art context. But it is quite normal to be a member of the Modern Art Museum in Berlin or in London or in Paris or whatever. And so if you connect with those societies, you will enjoy the possibility to establish exchanges and improve the position of Georgian artists also internationally. Even amongst my Georgian friends, I have a lot of people who do not understand what art is for, and especially not what modern art is for. It's development of ideas, culture building, and improvement of the understanding of life generally. Yeah? You will find all aspects of life in the exhibitions. It depends on, for example, what kind of literature you are reading. And you will understand, of course, when you are reading, that it is easier to understand. Not always, but very often, as opposed to paintings. Paintings is something a lot of people don't understand the worth of it. Yeah? But you have already big artists, and I understand they're catching very high prices in the international markets. And I've seen that the Swiss bank UBS is writing about Georgian artists. And also, I remember that you organized the Bonhams auctions and that they also started grouping the artists into national boxes. Russian artists, Georgian artists, and separating them. Not as before, where it was all put together in one box. I think that's quite an important development that is very beneficial for the Georgian market in particular, for the Georgians to understand how high prices the Georgians are catching in the international markets. There must be much more advertisement that I haven't been reading about. Artists have always been in the front line of the thinking of society. Freedom, because you mentioned freedom, is a very important element. In art, and a lot of the expressions of modern art is to fight against limitations and borders, and also mind-wise try to open the eye, try to open the thinkings. It is much more difficult to understand this in the case of paintings than in the case of reading books. It's easier for people to understand this. It's relatively simple. When you watch how the modern city is developing, it means people need to buy art, to decorate their own homes. And they will be learning also how to buy modern art, and not just, I don't know, classical or some that they have inherited from the grandmother or the grandfather and so forth, because you have good works in there that you can find when you really research for old Georgian art. But in the modern world and the modern city, they also want modern art there. They don't want to have old. It's always a mix in the end. The element of modern art in the modern decoration will be developing more. I'm pretty sure that there will be Georgian artists ending up in international collections, because these collectors that are also very often wealthy travel everywhere. They come to Tbilisi. When I first came to Tbilisi, I was surprised that people in my country knew about Tbilisi and how it looks like. They knew it from old trips, I don't know, where to, Gudauri or Kazbegi for helicopter skiing or something. Even if you go into places like the winemakers, they are typically also collectors. They also end up becoming wealthy and start decorating their places. And why? Because they went to France and saw the winemakers in France and what kind of shops they have and what kind of decorations they install. But of course, that's a different type of buying art. It's not to be mixed up with real collecting. Real collecting is systematic and following the advice of professionals. But in terms of taste, this affects also the Georgian market 100%. 100%. Let's take an example of an old European palace, Italian, how it is decorated and who has been sponsoring that. Those were wealthy families in the Middle Ages or in the 19th century and so forth. So modern art, of course, has been attached to it. If you go into modern European castles or palaces. And so it is always associated with wealth to a certain extent, because generally speaking, the poorer people will not really be able to buy the quality that they would love to have. So they buy, I don't know, reproductions or something like that. But it's interesting to see even there, people are buying modern paintings. It must not be Picasso, it's the same type of responding to art, that you understand suddenly that there's a very famous Georgian artist and you like what, and then you buy the production of that particular artist. But for the collector itself, who are the big collectors? Even today, they are institutions, they are not individuals, high net worth individuals, even though they are existing, first of all, and second, they are also collecting. But the real buyers and artist makers are the museums, because once a painting ends up in a museum, it never moves out of there anymore. And that's very important for building collections. And so the high net worth individuals will have an orientation in what the museums buy. And so the museums, of course, have whatever departments of people that study the artists, they study the markets, and they have a very in-depth knowledge of what is going on worldwide. So I anticipate that Georgia will also be closing in on having a lot of artists ending up in museums. One of the greatest ways to understand art or modern art is to read biographies of artists. One of the most famous ones is Pablo Picasso, and when you read his life, then you will see how much influence he has taken on society. But because he was talking, because he was having relationships, and was an extremely intensive person. Some are intensive, and some are very cautious and don't want to be too public or too present or are shy. Everything exists in the art world, especially also with the artists. And to understand them is in the end also a mix of ways how to look at it. Paintings, books, music. Sculptures also, very important. If you look at Calder as an international, well-known, famous sculptor, but what he's doing, a lot of people would say, I don't understand it. But the sheer size of his works is the convincing element. That's a matter of also some public interest in big works, because if you have a big painting, you need a place to put it. And if you're in a private apartment with 70 square meters, then you will not put a big painting. That's a very simple relationship. But if you have a lobby of a huge building and you put a big painting there, that's a different story. But those are more like public places. And so the public is participating in the art world. And that's important. I mean, the public is not only the public, it's the museums, it's the government, it's the support that you build up by sending artists abroad, into academies, into exchanges, into art fairs, and so forth. The Biennale, for example, is a perfect example of modern art fairs. And it's an automatic visiting point for every collector. They all go to the Art Basel and they all go to the Biennale. And you meet them all there, and artists, and also, of course, a society meeting point.